Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be sharing some of my backgrounds that I use in my colouring books or the PDFs that I print off. Just a few different techniques, and I want to start off with the watercolour first. Now I'm just using the Winsor & Newton Cotman paints here. I'm just going to pre-wet these and then I'll carry on talking just so they can activate and do what just want greens and blues for this background. Now sometimes I do prep the paper with gesso and a liquid satin, which I should have pulled out but I didn't. But the paper in this book is quite thick, so it does take the watercolour well. Another thing that I do sometimes use is masking fluid in a pen, and you would just go around all the edges, and that just stops the watercolour getting on the, in this instance, the frog. But I will do a little mark on here and show you exactly how it works, along with this Distress Resist spray. This is a very similar thing. So you spray it on, and once it's fully dry you do your watercolour painting, and then you just peel this off. It's the same thing. So actually first, I should have done this first. I'm just going to cover my page up just with an old cloth that I use for painting, and then we'll show you this. So with these you have to give them a really good shake to get them working. And then you just pump down. So if I show you in this direction, you just pump down and that brings the product down. And it might take a couple of goes because it's been a little while since I've used this, and it is coming out there, it's just splattered. So if I just do a couple of lines, a couple of dots, there we go, that's coming out more freely now. And I'll leave that to completely dry. So that is the masking fluid pen, and we'll try the spray next. So I'm going to cover the top part up just with the back of this card and attempt to spray. I've not used this in a little while either, so maybe give it a good shake. There we go. Two hands. There we go. So it's the same trick, you've got to leave that to dry as well. I mean, you'll probably be a little bit more careful than me, and because it's dried and it does go very, very sticky. So the same thing, I'm just going to leave that to dry. I'll just pop that to one side. So I'm a little bit more organised now. Please excuse my palette, but I've got paint in here that I'm not chucking away, I'm going to reuse. So that's why they're there. And let's just mix a colour that we want. Want a little bit more green in there. Make it more of a turquoise. And I am adding quite a lot of water to this. Right. So completely clean my brush off. Like so. I'll just pop this to one side now. And I think I've got a little bit of pigment from underneath the palette. I'm not very organised today. Anyway, we'll start off with the top of the frog, and I'm going to wet the paper first with just clean water. If you are worried about the edges, I really would use the masking fluid. It does come in a little pot, and then you can use just a paintbrush to apply it to the paper, but I find that the pen is just a lot cleaner, quicker, and a lot easier. So with it being clear, you might struggle a little bit seeing where you've put down the water. So if you just move the paper in the light, you can see whereabouts that you've put that water. So I wouldn't work too slow on this part because you don't want the water to completely dry before you have a chance to add the paint. So with the same paintbrush, I'm going ahead in that turquoise colour that we just mixed, and the paper is already starting to want to come up on itself. You see there, if this was watercolour paper I'd use masking tape, but with it being in a book I'm just going to have to hold it as best as I can. So if you do add it to the paper while it's wet, it does give, and I've missed a bit there, like a bloom effect. You're letting the pigment do what it wants. I'm going to make sure that I have it all the way up to the edge. just like this. And the trick is with this, even if I've missed a little bit there, it doesn't really matter, because as long as you let it to dry completely, you can go over and re-wet the area and then go ahead and do the same technique. I'm just going to clean my brush off and just make sure I've put enough water down in these areas. I would say it's a lot of trial and error, this technique, and if you're not happy with something, it's fine, you just make sure you let it dry before really trying to fix it. So I'll put a lot of pigment on there and then I'll just let it soak down and let it do what it wants to do, and if I'm happy with it I'll leave it, if not I'll go ahead and add more or less pigment. So I'm just going to add a little bit more. Pull this colour up, and then where the paper is still wet at the top as well, I'm just dabbing on more paint. And it will dry a lot lighter as well than it does look on the page at the moment. So let's dry the brush off again. I will show you once it's completely dry, so towards the end of the video I will show you the outcome of it. So same thing, just clean water. I'll bring this one out ever so slightly, just a little bit more. Go ahead in with your paint. I feel a little bit more confident now with the edges. And just a couple of splodges, and again up here I want these a little bit darker. Let's clean off the brush again and work on this side. Now I don't want them completely matching. And let's pull this colour out around the foot. That should be enough, and again with the paint. I would just be careful if you're doing this on thinner paper, because it might make the paper actually pill, and it does destroy the surface of the paper. I really would be careful, but if you're doing thin layers you should be okay. I'm just checking if I've missed any water, and I'm not. Then I'll just do this one foot here up the leg, and then bring it slightly round. And then back in with the same colour. And let's just go in and add a little bit more blue from the palette and mix that in. And let that do its own thing. I'm going to leave it to dry just for a couple of minutes. I'm not going to mess with it, just completely leave it to dry. So that's been drying now for about 5 minutes, give or take. And I'm going ahead and using some coarse salt. And I'm just going to sprinkle that over the water, just a little bit. And we'll move on to the little cards now, and we'll come back when this is completely dry. So the masking fluid and the spray is more or less dry now. You can see that that's glistener, but it's not damp to the touch. It feels like dry PVA glue, and that one's completely dry as well at the top. So I've just mixed a red colour. I'm just going to go over the top everywhere where I've popped both of these different products, and then we'll have to leave these to dry and then do a similar thing, come back. I'm just going over all of the areas. Let's add a little bit more water there. And I'm going to do the salt technique again here. Add more water and more paint. And I'm going to do it while the paint is still really, really wet, just to show you the difference. Let's add a little bit more pigment to that. So I'm just using the same coarse salt, but you can just use table salt. Just normal table salt works as well. So same thing, we'll leave that to dry and then we'll come back and I'll show you what the result is. On to some different inks. I've got some Spectrum Noir Sparkle inks, as well as some Jane Davenport Mermaid markers. Now these two different products will bleed through, so only use them either if you're colouring or painting a single-sided page, or you're not too worried about the page behind being spoiled by these two different things, because they will bleed through. Definitely, definitely. I'll start off with the mermaid markers, and you can colour straight onto the paper with these, but I'll show you the different ways that I've found using them. So I'm just wetting the paper a little bit there, and then we've just got a lovely, lovely pink. This is quite a light, bright pink, and you just squeeze this pen, the ink flows through and comes out of the tip. Now I think I'm going to, once I've used all the product up, all the liquid, I'm going to use these as aqua brush pens. I think they'll be brilliant. But I'll do that technique again because you might have missed it because I was jabbering on. So I'll wet it just a little bit there, and as soon as I touch the paper, you see the explosion of colour. But you can go ahead and use it dry as well. Let's go ahead with the green. And usually it's this technique that I use with the backgrounds. Normally I would do a watercolour, a very light watercolour wash in the background, and then pop a little bit of these inks over the top, but they do work dry as well. And you can activate them again with water. I probably should have chosen two colours that actually complemented each other, but nevertheless. So it's completely bled out, there's fuzzy edges, and as we get to the dry side you can see that the edges are really, really hard, and I've added a lot of ink there. You can see it moving around. So I'll re-wet this paper just to show you that the colour will move, and quite a lot. So you could pop these on a palette and then pick it up with the brush and paint like that as well, but they are inks. And I will let them dry because these are very, very similar. I'll do a bigger area. These are very similar, not identical, but they're similar to Distress inks, the way that if you wet them again, you can pick the colour up and you can get some really cool effects with that as well. So I do apologise for all the drying and the waiting, but it will be all chopped together and easy for you to watch. And I've got this liquid watercolour that I do like using with normal watercolour and with inks. Now, I thought I was going to struggle opening it. It does come with a little pipette, and you can just pop the colour on and it will just lay there, or you can go ahead with the brush to move the colour around. Just make sure my brush is clean. And it is very, very thick, so you could water it down, but it does give such a nice effect, this one. If you're adding it to areas that are already wet, it just bleeds out beautifully. You see that? Really nice. Let's wipe off the brush again. Yes, so this is the Spectrum Noir sparkle ink, and then these do come in pens as well. Now, have I got any to hand? Yes. So these are the same inks that are in the pens, and it's the same sort of tip, if I can get the lid off, as the Jane Davenport. So they do go down and lay really, really nice. But if you want to do larger areas, or you want a different effect, then this stuff is beautiful. Me and lids today, they're all sticking. So it does look foamy because I've just shooken it up. Let's go in. If I just, you can see how shiny that is. So if you're doing a larger area, it's a lot better to use the pots, and you get more of a vibrant colour. So this is a similar thing. I'll wet the paper and then pop this ink down just to get different sort of effects. Add more or less, whatever you like. And I've never tried the salt with these. Now I don't imagine that it'll work as well as with the watercolour paper with them being ink. But if you're looking for something that's really, really vibrant, these are excellent. Really, really good. Now let's move on to acrylic paint. Now with acrylic paint, I have got the Arteza acrylic paints, but I don't particularly like them in backgrounds. And if I am going to use acrylic, it's normally going to be the Americana Deco Art, the Lamp Black. Now this is the most opaque one that I have found. Just get a paintbrush. I'll just pop a tiny little bit. I've never ever had an issue with this paint, and it only takes one layer to cover the whole of the background. And a little goes a long way. And I found with this in particular paint, you can go over it with coloured pencil. Like if you wanted to use a white over the top, like add stars, or you know, whatever you wanted. Or gel pen. It's brilliant, brilliant paint, this one. But apart from this acrylic paint, I don't really use any other acrylic paints. I was going to mention and show Neocolor 2s, but Neocolor 2s are so similar to watercolours. They're just in a crayon form, so you can colour straight onto the paper and then activate them with water, the same as Inktense. But I thought I'd leave that out purely because they are very, very similar. They do similar things. While I've still got this paper out, I've not tested this product on watercolour paper yet. I've tested it out on smooth cardstock paper. But I was contacted by this company, Bambino, a good week ago now, and I've just been messing around with them, like I said, just on smooth paper. But I want to try them out now on watercolour paper. They're not water activated crayons. They are oil-based crayons. So usually you get your wax, like Crayola wax crayons. But I did want to feature these on the channel because they are really, really, really nice. And they do come with a nice fine point. This is 24 pack that the lady sent me. But I have tested, you can slightly blend them out with Zest It. So I'm going to do that right now and just show you how it works. So am I using the right side here? Right, so I'll do it on both sides. So I've got a smoother side and then the coarser side. So we can do it on both to show you. But they do keep a point very nicely as long as you keep turning the crayon. And if you wanted to do some just straight colouring, like block colouring, these are fantastic for that. And you can go over the top with polychromos and the Arteza pencils. Let's add a different colour. Let's go with like a peachy pink colour. I've not seen many people talk about these, and they are very, very nice. So I'm turning the crayon as I'm going just to make sure I keep that point. And this is just the Zest-It blender. I've cleaned this brush, we'll just pop that in. And then blend them two colours together. Let's add a little bit more. With Zest-It as well, I've noticed the same thing. You've just got to be careful how much you're putting down. So if you're working on a double page spread, let's say, and there's a page on the other side, I would be very, very careful, because it probably will bleed through. Is it even going to bleed through this? It is going to bleed through this, and it's quite thick paper, this as well, thick watercolour paper. But they do blend really, really nicely together. Let me try on the other side, the proper watercolour side. Let's go in with this goldy colour. And let's blend it into a red. So you can see the grains of the paper a lot more on this side. Let's get some Zest-It on there. I mean, they're not water activated, but this isn't water, and I think they're beautiful. They remind me a little bit of Neocolor 2s, to be honest. So let's have a look at the other side now. It should have dried out a little bit more. I have actually got a test sheet. I will get that test sheet. This is just on smooth cardstock. It's not overly thick paper, but I've swatched out all of the colours, and then I've used the Zest-It as well over the top. And you see how they do blend very, very nicely together. So if you're wanting to do your block colouring and add just a little bit of blending, then I would really recommend these. The Bambino colouring crayons, 24 pack. Really, really nice. So let's test out some Bruchot powders. Now I'm going to turn the paper over on this one and this one, just to protect my surface a little bit, because this can get messy. Now they are paints, but they're in a powder form, so they do come just like that. I've popped a hole in just with that, just to make it a bit easier on myself getting the pigments out. So we'll have a purple, we'll do purple, and I know that there's a yellow in here, a really nice yellow. Yeah, there we go, yellow. It does come as well with these little wax crayons, and all these are for is to stop the colour going down. So if I just put high there like that, and you can use these a few different ways. I know you won't be able to see that high yet, but you will do. You can either sprinkle them onto the paper. I bet you're thinking, what on earth is that, if you've not seen these before, but you don't need a lot. And then I'm just going to use my spray bottle, and I can use my spray bottle, but if you've got a fine mister, that would work as well. I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit of water, and it's a good job that I did put this down, and it's gone all over my desk, as you can see. But that's a cool effect. Or you can go ahead with the water first and then sprinkle the powder directly onto the water. I think that is so, so cool. It's very messy, don't get me wrong, and if you're doing it in your colouring book, you'd probably have to mask the page at the side of it, possibly the page behind it. You'd have to be very, very careful. But I did see, let's see if I can find that black colour again. I've got emerald green actually, let's try that. So am I going to need to mix that with the brush? I know it's activated all by itself. So with the black here, let's just put that straight down and then add a little bit of water. This black looks like to me that it's got bits of red pigments in it as well, mixed in. Definitely to make the colour But you see how vibrant that is, and then when it dries, it's a really, really cool effect. I've probably added a little bit too much emerald green. I am terrible for that going over the top. So let's move on to the next technique. So now we've got my beloved Distress inks. Now if you watch my channel for any time, you'll know that I absolutely adore these products. Now, I see a lot of people using these with it, and I don't like these. I can't get the nice blend that I would like. I really, really don't like them, but I've seen other people manage to work them just fine. So I think it's just, you know, whatever works best for you. But I use personally with these little makeup brushes. Now these are on the market as makeup brushes, and you can pick them up so cheap for like a pack of 10, all different sizes and shapes, for about £10, if not cheaper. And I just swirl them onto the brush, making sure to get enough pigment. And if there's a woman's face or whatever, I will be careful around the edges. If I get a little bit on, it doesn't bother me at all. But if you were too bothered, then I'll probably use a piece of paper to cover the bit of the image up that you don't want the Distress ink getting on. But let's just show you here. And this is just smooth cardstock paper that I'm using now. So I am going to do quite a little bit of a larger area with this, because I want to show you some stamps as well that work really nicely. Really beautiful, vibrant colour. So on the other side, I'm going to do the purple, and I'll do the splatter effect as well on the purple side. So same thing, just swirling it around on the brush, and you can see the pigment just about, if the light will catch it. And I start off with a light pressure going on to a harder pressure. Now if I was doing this on a colouring page, I would have used a different brush or just cleaned the brush, but as it's just for tutorial purposes, I'm not too worried. You'll still get the same idea. Right, so I'm quite happy with the amount of pigment that is on that now. Just bring you out ever so slightly. And just with my normal water bottle. Now I'm not pushing down all the way on this, because if I do, there's just going to be too much water coming on, and ever so slightly, if I just do it over this, ever so slightly tapping it, just to get a little bit of water to come out, just a couple of droplets. And I'd leave that for a minute or so. But it all depends as well what colouring book you're using this technique in, because the paper might be thinner, it might be thicker. This isn't the thickest of paper, this is, you know, but it works really, really well. So just leave it until you can see that the pigment is moving around a little bit. You can see just here, and that's when you know it's time to lift it up. So let's do this little area to test. See? And you just want to push down on the paper. Don't push down and then move your hand, because you're going to smear the ink. You just want to lift it up, so a firm pressure and then straight up, just like that. And if you're not happy with that and you want to add a couple of more, same thing again, but I'm just holding the bottle a little further back, and I won't leave it as long this time. Just lift the ink up, just like that. And you can do this in layers, like if you wanted to go over with the yellow colour over the top and add the same technique, it looks really, really cool. But on this side, I'm going to show you a couple of stamps. Now the ink that I use for this is the Memento ink. Got a couple of different stamps just to show you, and this is just a acrylic block. So you've got your stamp, and I've had this little flowery one just here, and it just sticks by itself to the block. Open the ink up. Now, I usually have to switch hands with this, and it's usually messy, and that's just because it's me, it's not because of this. and I'm just pushing it on to the stamp. And I've used this in a few pages where I thought, oh, it looks a bit burther, it could do with a little bit of something. And if I'm not in the mood to draw it and colour it and paint it myself, these are absolutely ideal. So if I just add it towards the bottom, lightly lay it down, and then push down, and then lift. A really, really lovely stamp. So we'll try. This is my favourite stamp. I've got ink still all over it. I'm terrible for not cleaning it. Are you going to come off in one piece, or are you going to completely stick to it? You're going to completely stick to it. Doesn't matter, I can still use this like that without the block, and I think this block was too small anyway. Yeah, it was. So even with the plastic on the back, I'm just going to push the ink onto the stamp, just like this. Carefully move all that out of the way. Carefully lay down and just push down. You see what I mean though about it being messy? It's all good fun. And then quickly just lift it up. And I've used this in quite a few different backgrounds, and it's given a really, really good effect. Now let's see whereabouts we are up to drying. That's obviously not dry just yet. You can see the paper has crinkled ever so slightly with the water that I've used. But I think this is good for if you do any journaling as well. If you added your own pictures and put stamps over the top, I think it's a really, really good effect. And you know, I love this one. So let's see whereabouts we're up to drying, and we'll bring everything back. So I've still got some still wet, some of them are completely bone dry, so we'll just work with it. So the Jane Davenport markers, they are completely dry, and the Spectrum Noir sparkle pens, as you can see when I put the water down and added the ink, it's given it like a flurry effect on the outside. The same with the Jane Davenport. I love that effect, absolutely love that effect, and that is dry. But like I said I was going to do, I will wet this a little bit. This pink one here, let me just wet my brush. And if it's gonna do as it's told, yeah, there you go. So you can re-wet areas and then work the pigment. But also, I do the same technique as what I did with the Distress ink. I've just popped a bit of water on there. Just leave it there just for a second, and then we'll pick the colour up. The same as we did with the Distress ink. I'm trying my best not to make a mess. And work with what I've got, because I've got stuff everywhere. So let's see if that's going to be long enough. Let me just do a little test. Yes, that's fine. So same thing, just straight down to pick the water up, and it does give it a nice effect. The longer that you leave the water, the more of the pigment it is going to lift up. But even this here, if you wanted to do a galaxy background, so pop the water down first and then add the Jane Davenports. But I love this effect. But as you can see, even on thick watercolour paper, it is going to bleed through. So that's them. So now we've got these ones that I did the salt effect and the masking fluid and the, what was that one called? The Distress Resist spray. I had to check then, I couldn't remember. So the salt, I'm going to remove all this salt, and it isn't 100% dry, but you will get the idea. So if I just, my table's going to be a mess. I should have left it to dry a lot longer than I have, but you get the idea. The sort of effects that it does give to the paper. If you're a little bit more patient than me, but for tutorial, for the video purpose, you know, you get the idea. But if you leave it longer, leave it to dry thoroughly, it is a better effect. Now, I'm not too sure what this is. I think it's just called a masking fluid eraser. It's a really, it's like rubbery. And I'm just going to use this to remove any of the masking fluid that I popped down at the very start of the video. And this is excellent if you're wanting to keep areas white, or you're wanting to protect, let's say, the frog's feet or whatever. It does keep the paper perfectly white. So let's go ahead and remove this spray. And I can't quite remember whether this worked with it or not, or you just leave it as. I can't remember. I think you might just leave it as. It's been a long time since I've used it. I think it is. But I forgot about that bit. If I just lift the paper up, can you see? It gives it a little bit of a 3D effect, and it does feel a little bit like dry PVA glue. But that sort of effect, if you was doing more of I know I've used red, that's what the first thing that comes to mind, but if you was doing more of a gory picture and you wanted the blood splatter, this would be a really good effect. Or if you're doing like a water scene, another really good effect. Now the Bruchot paints, because that's what I did very last, haven't dried yet, and as you can see I added too much green and it's over to the orange, and it's gone absolutely everywhere, so I'm having to keep it on here. But it does give a really neat effect, and if you're not as heavy handed as me, you'll get a better effect at the end as well. So that's that one. And then we've got the distressing that we've just worked on last with the splatter effect and leaving it just as it is with stamps over the top. That's a really, really easy one, that. And then my favourite is the watercolour effect, and I've done the same trick. I'm not leaving it long enough to dry, but I have got a couple of videos, I think it was my last one actually, the one before, that showed the effect of me actually doing this and it working really, really well. Because I think it all depends as well on the paper. I'm not going to smudge this too much because I am planning on finishing this page. But you saw how easy it was just to lay down the water, the clean water, and pop a little bit of watercolour down. And I think it gives a really, really nice effect. You've got the fuzzy edges that I like, different depths of colour. I just think that's a really, really neat way of doing it. And you could always go ahead and add a little bit of distress ink and then do the splatter effect just for a little bit of extra something on the outside so the paper's not so white. But yeah, that's the majority of the techniques that I do use on backgrounds. I do love to do backgrounds. It's one of my favourite things to do actually, in colouring books. I haven't included like my pan pastels because I haven't used them in a very, very long time, and I do need to practice with them again before coming on the channel and showing you guys what I actually do with them. And I don't want to be using loads and loads of different colouring books and having loads of whips, because that will drive me insane. But yeah, that is all the different techniques. So if you're wanting, probably the easiest one is either the distress ink, the splatter effect with the stamps. And then I'd probably go with the watercolour effect. And then if you're feeling really adventurous, I'd go with inks. Inks are really, really fun. But if you really want to have fun and be messy, go with the Bruchot powders. They are fun, but they are messy. I've got white walls behind me, and I've got blue paint going up them where I splash paint up. So yeah, I'm going to have to clean that up now. But I hope this does give you a couple of ideas, and I do apologise for not doing backgrounds in each of the techniques now in my books, but I hope you understand. I don't want a million whips, because that will just stress me out. But I hope you have a nice day. Please do like this video if you did find anything helpful, or you found something new that you want to use or put on your wish list. But have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.